Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Minefield podcast on Anfield Index Pro. My name is Alan O'Donoghue, and as always I am joined by Mr. Andrew, should we say Dr. Andrew Vincent? Would that be...
You could, but we haven't been, so it seems weird to start now.
You know, when you hear, the Under Pressure boys talk about Dr. Phil, I think we should call you Dr. Andrew,
Fine with me.
Guys, if you could see the smile on Andrew's face right now, he's just...
No one else does, so I don't know why we would start here and give listeners the wrong idea.
No, we're not going to do that. We'll just call you Andrew.
Yeah, I think that's for the best. That's for the best.
So, talking about keeping things simple, today, Andrew, we wanted to have a look at not Liverpool. And what we were thinking was, because we talk about Liverpool from the Mentality Monsters perspective quite a bit, and we have done recently as well, which is fantastic. But off the back of the last week, where we have played our physical nearest rivals in Everton, and we have played our historical nearest rivals, Manchester United, in the space of the week. And we thought it might be interesting to look at the culture from the perspective of both of those clubs rather than from Liverpool, to see what maybe a more negative culture and the impacts of a negative culture can have on a team or a club or an organisation in total. So with that in mind, I suppose, Andrew, we could pick either one to delve into, but for both of them, in some ways, they're very different. So if we look at Everton, and from my perspective, and please correct me if you've got a different take, but I look at them and they got this injection of cash, and there was, the pictures of a lovely stadium, and they went out and splashed cash all over the place. And the culture that seemed to be created was, because we have money, we are now going to be fantastic. We are now going to be amazing. And that we are going to topple the red shite, as they would call us, right? And whereas we look at Manchester United, and to me they seem like a dying, bloated pig, like one of those. There's actually a Pearl Jam poster that was never released, right, of this just big, bloated kind of pig being carried by these people, and it's like the rich man who just can't even walk. He's so big and bloated. And that's the picture that comes to my mind when I think of Manchester United. So which of those two would you like to discuss first?
I would love to actually be able to release the video of this conversation, because neither of us can just stop grinning. It's like we get to do this today. Is like we get to talk about the anatomy of a collapse, the anatomy of a mental collapse, and it's not our mental collapse.
Yeah,
like we get to choose. Would we really rather talk about Everton or Manchester United? Like, God, what a day! What a good day!
We are living the dream. Absolutely,
this is a good day.
It is.
God, I'd like to start with Manchester United. Nothing would make me happier.
Off you go.
So, a couple different things there. So, like, I think the one that always is pointed to is just the power vacuum left in place by Ferguson. Like the hand that he had in running every facet of that organization, and how he went about running that organization and keeping things under control. And then, he leaves and there's the power vacuum that's left. There's the fact that maybe the club and like playing staff wise isn't quite in the condition that it would have been in the past. You get in a series of managers who are all there really quickly and leave fairly quickly. Players who are brought in kind of haphazardly. Players who are brought in who maybe aren't necessarily like, I don't know, in ice hockey we'd call them good locker room guys, but like aren't necessarily the kind of people who are going to create interpersonally and work-wise the sort of culture that you want across the club. So all of these are things that we can dive into more. And then, I think you get a little bit of a snowball effect in these things too. But one of the biggest things that like I think of with United, just to keep it sort of simple, is like some sort of leadership hierarchy. And I think someone will think it's, often when we talk about Liverpool, we talk about how important it is that people are like very equal and there's space for these different voices. And like, that's absolutely true. And so like, when I talk about a leadership hierarchy, I don't mean like a very rigid ladder of this person answers to this person, answers to this person, but like, you need to have a sense of who the culture is emanating from and who you're looking to, and also like who has power. And power becomes so important in these different things because like within Liverpool, there's no questions. Klopp has the power and the leadership group has the power, and they wield that power in a way that it shares and it creates that feeling of value, and different people feel like they're valued. It's not just like, hey, these people who are powerful, they're running the show and the rest of you can all like fuck off or whatever and just deal with whatever you get. It's like there's people in charge, but the people in charge have the interest of the group in mind in a way that creates a really nice culture. If you look at United after Ferguson leaves, there's almost always a question of who's in charge. Like, who are your leaders as players? Like, who are your leaders within the structure of the club? Is Ferguson still the leader? Is the manager the leader? Is the director of football the leader? When a new manager comes in, like even a strong presence like Van Gaal, there's always been this pull of sort of like the playing staff, and is the manager able to kind of get the playing staff in line? And then, I don't know, Van Gaal's obviously kind of a wild card in a fun way. So like, Mourinho's there. He's kind of a wild card in a fun way. Like, there's no doubt there that those are both individuals who want to command the sort of power of the room, but like the playing staff doesn't really support that. And maybe like we're just moving towards a generation of players that does better with a Klopp-like manager who's creating more of like a shared power structure. So I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think attending to that leadership hierarchy and just like, where are people taking their cues from? That would be a good place for us to start, I think. Maybe with both, but definitely with United.
Yeah, and I think, although Ferguson left his role as manager, he didn't leave the club. So he went upstairs and became a director, and by all accounts, he still had quite a strong presence in the decision-making processes that were in place. And I think part of that was actually part of the downfall as well, because it appeared to the outside that the owners still deferred to Ferguson above the head coach. And not that he was purposely trying to, bring them down. Maybe he was, who knows? But I don't think he was purposely trying to bring them down. But that having that structure and hierarchy just actually doesn't provide a sense of who actually is in charge. It's almost like having kids. We all love the idea of our kids looking at mum and dad or whoever the parents are and saying, well, they're both equal and their word is equal. And if one parent gives out to me, it's the exact same as if the other parent gives out to me. But it's not. There will always be one parent that will be the more authoritative one, that will hold the power, and we can try and decide that that's not the case. Or with animals, like animals need one master, so, or pets need one master, or whatever. So I think having him still there definitely had a major impact on it. I think what it probably did was it provided blockages to a new culture being created, or a new structure being created, that is still being felt today.
For sure. And I think where you see it now is like, where are values being enforced? And so like there's a process for enforcing values that's true within any group. Is like either you need to have communication within that group, so certain norms and values are communicated. Like, that's not how we go about training. That's not how we show up to games. That's not what we do if we're down by 2 goals. Like, this is, you need those people within the leadership structure. It's what gives, like, having that leadership structure allows people to enforce those values and enforce those norms and say with, this is what we are and this is what we aren't. And then if you can become what we are and you can fall in line with our values and fall in line with our norms, then like, great, like that's what we want. There's a gravitational pull to that field of culture. Like, people gravitate towards those norms. But if there's no authority anywhere to reinforce those or to enforce those, then all of a sudden, like, you've got different people behaving in different ways and thinking that different things are right and wrong. Or, you have subgroups where it's like this group has their norms and their culture and this group has their norms and their culture. And that becomes really, really difficult for a unified group. It becomes really poisonous because, I don't know, let's say like you and I are in this team and like you and I have different ideas about how we should be going about training and what's okay and what's not okay. And maybe I'm like, I don't know, whatever. Like, I'll have a more casual approach to training, right? It's just practice, but I'm really talented, Al. So like, whatever, like I'm going to show up on the weekend no matter what. And like, I'm going to show up like however I want. And I'm going to like, sure. And like, maybe you're a little more old school or whatever. You're a little bit more disciplined with your practice and, the intensity you want every day. If I have a group of 3 or 4 players who I'm close with, and you have your group of 3 or 4 players who you're close with, and let's say you go to me and you're like, Andrew, you got to get into shape here. We're losing all our games. Like, people are looking at you and they're seeing the bad example you're setting, and like they're following that example, and like you got to show up. And I'm like, yeah, like forget it. If I can turn around and go back to my buddies and say like, can you believe this? Like, Al gave me a hard time about this. Like, he has no idea what he's going. And they're like, yeah, you're right. Like, this is fine. Now what? Right? Like, I have my group. They've reinforced that I think I'm right. And they think I'm right. You have your group. They've reinforced that you think you're right. And then if there's no one above us saying, here's who's right and here's who's wrong. And by the way, Andrew, take a hike. We're going to replace you. And that's going to send a message to the 4 players who are following you that you either get in or you get out. We're stuck. And who knows how many groups there are at any given time.
And how, like, when we look at the coaches that they've had in place, like, they're not shrinking violets. They've been, although okay, none of them were at the top of their game when they went in terms of how they were being perceived in terms of world's best managers, but they were all, but most of them were top coaches that had a lot of trophies under their belts. How were they not able to instill that sense of structure when they went in?
Well, I think 2 things, right? And maybe 3, actually. So, like, first, let's look at I want to focus on the group, but, like, focusing on the individuals who came in, too. Paying attention to how Van Gaal and Mourinho use their power and how they go about being powerful is very polarizing. And so I think, like, they go in in a way where, like, they're not going to take everyone under their wing. They're not going to really go and, like, coddle every single player. They're not going to make necessarily that personal connection with every single player. Mourinho often tries to motivate people and move people by, yes, being close to them, being their buddy, but also by calling them out and putting a ton of pressure on them and singling them out in the media. And I think by and large you have a group that's not going to respond to that. And so if people respond to that, great, that might create a really good sense of unity. But if people don't respond to that, then actually you create additional polarization. And so as much as I think both of those are really powerful, commanding people, they don't necessarily strike me as always being very strong, consistent communicators who would be able to unite a group by being differently to different people. It seems like they're people whose approach is going to work or it's not going to work. And I think they also, like, they depend really heavily on a power structure above them to get rid of players who they don't want. And so Mourinho's approach works really well if you have an organized enough club that's behind Mourinho in a way where if he says, I'm getting rid of these 8 players, they need to be gone and I need 8 new ones, that helps a lot, right? Because then if, let's say you walk into a new dressing room, you split the group, maybe you get 75% and you lose 25%, you bail on the 25%. You send them to train with the youth team, they're gone, they're done. And so if you don't have that structure in place to be able to fully back the manager, which it doesn't really feel like Mourinho ever had at United, then you always have that little group that still hangs out and becomes louder, because if we're going to introduce laws of physics here, which don't perfectly have equivalents in psychology, but I think people sort of recognize that parts of them do, like every action has an equal and opposite reaction. If you're in an argument with someone, usually the louder you yell, the louder they yell back. And so oppositional dynamics usually create increasing opposition until someone backs down and listens. And that's often what dissolves that sort of oppositional dynamic. But like Mourinho's not a back down and listen kind of person. And you see that, especially over the last 3 or 4 clubs where he's been at, is what happens is like the oppositional dynamic just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until finally he's the one who gets paid a ton of money to leave. Yeah. And so I think that's part of what's happened there. And I think with both of them, and I don't remember what happened with Van Gaal quite as much, but like I imagine something similar is like if you just have players who are like, forget this guy. And I think United also have this problem too, which is that they consistently bring in really good players and expensive players. And it's harder to bail on expensive players, or it's more expensive to bail on expensive players and admit we made this mistake than it is to bail on inexpensive players. And so at some point, like if you've brought someone in on super high wages and you've paid 70 million for them, it's hard to send that person to go train with the reserves. And so like that creates an issue too. Every manager who's come in, they've bought them new expensive players. And Pogba, to me, is such an indicator of all of this, because Pogba ended up at Juventus largely because Ferguson said he didn't want him.
Yeah.
Didn't think he was the kind of personality and presence that he wanted at the club, which, you look at it now and you have to think he was probably onto something. And that's not to say there's not places where Pogba has done really well, because he has. But for whatever reason, in that setting, in that environment, they were like, okay, like this is the kind of player who we don't want here. And like that's not always the thing against players. Certain players are great and don't fit into certain cultures. And, the fact that they then bought him for a ton of money and they couldn't really move him on. They couldn't get rid of him. But every manager there, it seems like, has had some sort of issue with Pogba. Yeah. No one's really been able to unlock him.
And I think that what you're talking about actually highlights the lack of cohesion just from the very start. So there was not that person who came in. Sorry, there wasn't a person who was good enough or had the abilities to manage that, because it seemed like Woodward, their chief executive, he tried to take over that control, or certainly was given that control, and he just didn't know what to do with it. He just didn't know how to manage it. And I don't know his background. I don't know what his previous work had been like. But, to hand the reins like that to somebody, or for him to say, I can do this, and then start just throwing money at players and coaches. And, it's almost like picking up the local tabloid and just seeing who's the next big, most popular player, and we'll go buy him and give him a huge contract. And by the way,
one Fellaini.
Yeah.
This is what we're talking about.
And but not only that, but then gives massive wages to their underachieving players time and time again to retain their value when they have no value.
Right.
So yeah. I think it's a lot of it will I don't think United fans will point the finger at Ferguson. And maybe it's not a case of pointing the finger at him, in particular, but maybe the ownership needs to be looked at from the perspective of their inability to understand the importance of creating a new culture.
Yeah, and I think like in order to create a good culture, you need to have a vision of what are we doing and why is this going to work, and have a plan. And so you look at what Klopp did at Liverpool, like he had a plan. He knew how he wanted to play. He knew how he wanted his players to be. He knew what this should look like, ideally. And then he articulates that vision and he hands over power to other people. And so the recruitment staff said, hey, we hear what you're saying. We know how to do that and do our job within that in ways that you don't even understand. He doesn't need to understand, like maybe he does understand all of the statistics and all the different things, but like maybe not. But like he can turn that over and say, great, like here's what I'm looking for. I trust you to look at this in your own way and bring this back to me. And ultimately, like we'll need to talk to make sure we're on the same page, and maybe he'll have final approval. But like he's not someone who's going to say, no, I need my 3 guys.
And trust is so important to that.
Mm-hmm. The recruitment staff doesn't know what they need to do unless he can articulate his vision to them. And then they design their statistics, they design their recruitment tools, they design their metrics for evaluating players in reaction to what he's saying. Like, if you just said to, I don't know, perhaps like under pressure people could comment on this in a different way, but like, my guess is if you went to a recruiting team and you said, get me the best players, that would be not enough information for them to do their job. Because you need the best players for what? The best players at what? The best players to fit what kind of what kind of system and what kind of game. And so United have had a really inconsistent vision. And so like when you have an inconsistent vision and then you bring people in and then you create a new vision, you bring people in, but it doesn't seem to me like they've had a top to bottom consistent vision for how they want to play, how they want to be, what they want it to look like, what they want their players to be like, who they want to be attracting regularly. And, then you just have people pulling in different directions. And so like, we'll talk about how bad their decision making was, but it's almost impossible to make good decisions without a clear idea of where do we want to be going, because you need that end goal. You need that idea of where we should be heading, and even in order to even know if the decisions you're making are right or wrong. So you have all these people doing their best in opposite directions, and where it leads to is where they are now, which is exciting for us.
Yeah, and like I'm in my life, I am surrounded by Manchester United fans, and when Ollie came in at the start and did okay at the start, the one thing they all said, and even for a year or two afterwards, they would say, oh, but he's brought back the United way. And I would always ask them, what is the United way? And they're like, well, like the United way, and none of them could actually articulate what the United way was. And you would see in the press that they talk about the United way. What's it actually mean? And I think if we look at Klopp's trajectory, he didn't come in and start talking about the Liverpool way of being. He didn't talk about trying to replicate the boot room. He came in with his vision. And what it has done is it has got so many clear links to how the boot room worked. But that was not based on him coming in going, I want to recreate the boot room. It was, this is how I work and this is what we're working towards.
Absolutely. It allows everyone in the organization to then make decisions that are in line with that approach. And it allows people to self-select for whether or not they want to be part of that. Like people can leave if they don't like it. And like it's, leadership. And maybe this is a good thing to point to with Van Gaal and Mourinho too. Like, leadership isn't about forcing everyone to do things the way you want. It's about creating that vision and articulating it in such a way that people want to follow you. And so, like, it doesn't matter how dynamic and charismatic you are if you are just sort of a jerk, or if people aren't buying what you're selling, then you're going to be walking by yourself. That doesn't make you a leader. It just makes you a maverick. When sometimes mavericks are good leaders because people follow them. Sometimes they're terrible leaders and end up just by themselves, just spewing nonsense about whatever. Or we call it nonsense because no one followed them. It's just about consensus or not. And so with Klopp, he's someone people want to follow because he can make those personal connections really well, but also he can articulate pretty clearly what he wants. And, he had the added benefit that it's worked. And so the success has followed, and that makes people want to follow more. Whereas at United, no success has followed, and that's been problematic, or there's been small moments of success, but not enough to give anyone a real foothold to really be around long enough to create a functioning organization. And then, I think as much as we can say that Ollie and the United Way, it was a little silly, and maybe it was in some ways, but also it appears to have been working better than what they're doing now, because there was enough to it that they were performing better than they are currently. Right? So I actually think if Ollie had stuck around, they would have had a better chance at top 4 than they had after he left. But they never would have had a chance of progressing beyond that. They would have been exactly what they are. But his, at least he had something he was pointing to and a culture he was trying to create. Whereas Rangnick right now is basically just saying yeah, these guys are shit. And I think that's what we're seeing in this part of the season now. I'm dumbfounded that after that they said they have nothing to play for. They're still within touching distance of 4th. And if you don't have that to play for, at least it's your direct rival, And so, I point a finger at Randy. Yeah, he inherited a pile of shit, but it was a pile of shit that at least was fighting for something and was benefiting from that. Whereas now he's basically just saying yeah, fuck it. We're useless and we need 10 or 11 players. And yeah, maybe you need 10 or 11 players, but you've got 10 or 11 players there. So it's this is the issue now. Is the word they're getting from the top down is you're all a mess. And what do you do with that as a player? How do you go out in the field and look around and be not only might I not be here next year, but I don't know who will be, who won't be. I don't know what they're bringing in. This person who's on the sideline, who's supposed to be in charge, he's basically just given up. Clearly he's just given up and said, this isn't good enough, but we'll address it later. And what do you do with that? This is the vision now. We're not good enough. And that's what they look like.
Yeah, I find it so strange considering I think isn't he due to be going upstairs and being director of football or something like that as well? And that's your first port of call. And they just look well, why would we bother when nobody in the club is showing any kind of sense of progress or vision or anything like that. And it is absolutely beautiful.
It is absolutely beautiful. And I think if you want a point of reference, we can look at Barcelona. Because if you were to start at the beginning of the year this year in August or September. September is the one that comes after August, not July. So anyway, Dr. Andrew, getting his months right. If you would ask people in September which club is a bigger mess, Manchester United or Barcelona, across the board, people would have said Barcelona. And ask people now, which club is a bigger mess? Financially, probably Barcelona, but they've turned it around. They're a pretty good lock, I think, to make top 4. They've had some bad results, but they've looked much better since they brought in Xavi. If you look at one of the things that Xavi did, part of it was injuries, right? They had a ton of injuries. But another thing that he did was he went and found the 17-year-olds who wanted to play for something. And he said, this is our identity. And the people who aren't going to do this, fine. I'll bring in a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old, and we'll get something from them. And we'll make something new with them. And if you want to be part of it, great. If you don't, fine, I'll use the 17-year-olds. And okay, they have a great academy, and so maybe they're blessed with that. But I actually think United probably have a decent crop of young players too who they could turn to. And if you had someone there who was coming in with the backing, and maybe it's Xavi's a legend there, so he has some backing to be able to turn around and say, fine, these people are useless. I'm going to turn to the kids, and then we'll integrate players back in and see what we get from them. And he's gotten more from them. Yeah. And they bailed on Coutinho. Like, they bailed on some of the people who were projects who they took their losses, you know? And meanwhile, United, it's, you know, that's what they could have done. That's what Ranieri could have done for the second half of the season, to say, okay, we know basically who's coming in. We know who's leaving and who isn't going to be here next year. If you really think you have nothing to play for, then, like, what are you doing dragging Nemanja Matic out of his grave and putting him on the field? It's like let him be. He said he's leaving. He's basically just like, please leave me alone. Like, let me ride this out. Like, go find these kids who are willing to play for something and start building something with them that's identifiable. And that, you know, that's better than having everyone stand there and be like, you know, oh, we just lost to Liverpool 4-0. We're 7 years behind them. We'll never get there. These players aren't good enough. Like, we're all arguing with each other. It's super pathetic and enjoyable for that.
And moving directly across Stanley Road or Stanley Park, you know, Everton. And as I said at the start, we have this club who got all this money, and they were going to be the next Big Bollocks walking around the Humber, or the Mersey, the Humber. I used to live in Hull, guys. The Mersey, and knocking us off the perch that we've been on, blah 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 blah, and it's an absolute shit show there. Like, they are really in danger of getting relegated. Really, really, really in danger.
Something I was thinking about the other day about people in general, but I think it applies very nicely to Everton in this situation, is
people
Icarus.
Shit.
Icarus and wax wings and the Greek idea of hubris. Brilliant. And, like, flying too close to the sun and having your wings melt. And, like, that's not necessarily about shooting too high or dreaming too big. It's about thinking you deserve something that you are not necessarily entitled to. And not just, like, saying, hey, I want to work for this and strive for this. But saying, like, I can take these wax wings and fly close to the sun right now. And then, for Everton, when that didn't work, they got new wax wings and they flew closer to the sun. And when those didn't work, they bought new wax wings and flew closer to the sun. And every time they said, we just have the wrong wax wings, let's buy new ones. And so what happened is the mess that they're in now. And it's about unrealistic expectations and how that plays out when you have to create a new vision time after time after time, is that, like, it gets harder to reinvent yourself the more times you try and do it. And maybe people have had this experience. Like, this can be relatable. Individually, we can do this too, right? Like, we're having a bad day. We're having a bad week. We're like, okay, like, this week, I'm going to pull it all together. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's my plan. I'm going to totally reinvent things. Like, I'm coming at this week hard. And you wake up Monday and you get after it. And maybe this motivates you and pushes you for 3 days, 4 days a week, a month, whatever. But, like, if you run out of steam and then you're like, you know what, I had it wrong. I have to reinvent myself in this totally different way, right? Here's the thing I was actually missing. Like, I need to exercise more. I need to eat healthier, or I need to be more positive, or whatever. Like, the more you reinvent yourself, the harder it is to really believe yourself the next time you engage in that process of reinvention. And it's even harder when you're a football club, because, like, you're buying new players every time. And so I imagine the equivalent would be like, if you woke up on Monday, you're like, working out is my thing this week. Let me buy all the workout stuff. Like, I'm going to make a home gym. And so you've bought all this stuff for this home gym. And then you're like, you know what was missing from my life wasn't the home gym. It was the food, and I'm going to buy myself a subscription to this nutrition service. I'm going to buy a year subscription. So now I have the home gym that I'm not using. The nutrition service comes in. I used it for a few weeks. I'm like, it wasn't the home gym or the meal subscription. It was music is missing from my life, right? Because they've had these totally different ideas. Music was missing from my life. I need to learn how to play the guitar. And I'm going to buy an expensive guitar and guitar equipment. or whatever. And then all of a sudden, like, that hasn't solved the issue. So it's like, okay, like, each time you reinvent yourself, you also are running out of money now, in addition to running out of enthusiasm. And that just is, that's where they are. There's nothing wrong with the players they have now, except that they're totally inconsistent with any sort of vision. And it's hard at some point. Rafa has a clear idea of how he wants to play, right? You can't take that away from him. He's not necessarily someone who's, I think, like, interpersonally terribly inspirational, but he knows how he wants to play. And it says a lot that didn't work. Because the reason it didn't work is also because of how the expectations compared to what is existing there right now. And so, like, we talked, like, this all started with a conversation about flying too close to the sun, or expecting yourself to fly too close to the sun. Well, the expectation is that you should be flying close to the sun, but your basement is full of 3 years worth of shit reinvention projects. Like, maybe the first thing to do is just say, what are the small steps? And, like, what do we need to do to just make a couple steps to make this look a little better? This is where we are right now. Let's be honest with ourselves. But I think the fans at Everton have all this money. They're looking at this money. They're expecting to be flying close to the sun. So they're cycling through managers really quickly, probably not because there's anything wrong with those managers or anything wrong with the project. It's something that's wrong with the expectation. So those things are out of sync. And that's how you get a bad culture, is you have an ununified vision. And so that's part. And the people who have all of this money, by the way, are also like, well, money should be buying us these wins. What's going on here? And so they're cycling through these things too. And so that's how you end up with the kind of mess, is like, now you have a group of people who are expecting results that are impossible from where they are right now. And, like, the further you move into this, the more disconnect there is between what's possible from the group in front of you and where the expectations are. And so the more that divide creeps in and becomes wider and wider, like, the more desperate you become, because, you know, now you're not even just, shoot, we wanted top 4 and we're looking at Europa League. Shoot, we wanted Europa League and now we're at mid-table. You're like, this far into the project, we want it to be a Champions League team, and we're looking pretty good to get relegated.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, yeah. That was a real rant for me. I'm sorry. Here, please say something.
I like the Icarus imagery, and I think, like, if you know all that stuff that people have in their houses that they trip over and all that kind of stuff, it actually becomes a hindrance and gets in the way. But we hold on to it until the day that we're going to definitely need it again, just in case. And I think that's what they've done. In terms of, they're holding on to a Jordan Pickford, they're holding on to a Michael Keane, they're holding on to a Seamus Coleman. And they're just not fit to do what needs to be done in order to maintain their place in the league. Forget about Champions League, forget about Europa League, forget about Europa Conference. They are just not fit enough to do what they need them to do. But yet it's like, no, we got to hold on to them, because they're the ones who are going to get us there. They're the ones that we bought into it, and they've bought into it, and this is what's going to happen. So at what point do you have, and I think this is part of the issue with Rafa, is that he does appear to like to control everything, like almost like a Fergie light, in terms of that's what he would like, all transfers. And that's not how clubs work anymore. I think that's probably why he has struggled. But somebody in there has to be taking the reins, and it doesn't appear to be anybody. So, you know, they came out and talked this big talk and invested a lot of money. It all, again, quite similar actually to United. It seemed quite scattergun, just kind of, you know, let's take the most, you know, popular player out there. Or what also seems to have happened is let's look at who Liverpool are being linked with, and we'll buy them first because we're richer than they are. And I think at some point it's about, I think they still live in this world of, we are the underdogs against Liverpool. And they need to break away from that to just go, we are Everton Football Club. And so instead of looking outward, they need to look inward, go, we're Everton Football Club. What do we want? Whether that's win the league or not, but at least start with, what do we want? And we're going to focus on ourselves. And even their fans still, it's constant. It's constant. Liverpool, 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 Liverpool. And it's like, lads, while you're busy looking at us, your ship is sinking. So stop singing songs about us, stop looking at us, stop focusing on us. You got to start plugging these fucking holes and get the ship back in order.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look, like on this side of the pond, I don't know enough Everton fans to really be able to tell you.
The ones I know are they've just given up.
And I mean, look, it's got to be hard to be in your lowest moment when your rivals are in their best moment.
Mm.
But, that doesn't mean that the way out of it is to pretend you're something you're not, and to shoot the moon and try and like be back there immediately. And I think, like you said, like it's a scattergun approach, because Man United and Everton, I think, both kind of fell into the trap of being like, okay, we want success. Our plan is to spend money and be successful. But like, there's a big how that's important in there. And I don't know how well this reference will translate to anybody, but like South Park and the Underpants Gnomes, like step 1, underpants, step 3, profit. And it's like, there is no, like, I forget there was no step 2. Like, I think that was the joke or something like that. But like, like for both of them, they're like step 1, buy great players. Step 3, like success. And there's a big step 2 that Liverpool has really clearly and Manchester City has really clearly right now. Like, both of those clubs just have such a clear vision of how they want to play and how they want their dynamic to be. And the rest of the organization can function around that goal. And I think, one of my reasons too, that I can pinpoint, especially with Everton so clearly, how expectations play into this, and United, and how expectations play into it, and the gap between those expectations and reality is like, it's a huge issue with United States soccer and the men's national team. Like, and people will think this is funny from the outside, I think, but like from the inside, there is always an expectation for the U.S. men's team that we should be dominant in our region. And part of that is because, like, you look at who's in our region. Mexico is quite good until like 3 months ago. Canada really was nothing. Like, and then it's like you have these South American countries that don't necessarily have a huge international reputation, of like El Salvador and Costa Rica has had some good teams, but they're not, like renowned necessarily for having these great teams. And Panama and, a lot of these countries that just aren't necessarily powerhouses. And, you get these American fans or people who are sort of new to the sport, and they're like, well, we should be dominating these teams. But it's like, why? Why would we ever expect that? Like, we've never shown that we're dominant over them. We've never consistently gone to play in those countries where it's incredibly difficult to play and beaten them consistently. Like, what is this expectation? Every year it's like, well, soccer in the United States is growing and we have more money, which is true. And we have better like facilities, which is true. And we have this growing talent pool, which is true. But like, until you actually are consistently showing with your results that like, this is what we do and this is who we are and we're better than these other countries, like that expectation that we should be dominating people is so dangerous. And a really good example is this year, and probably most people listening won't have any awareness of this, but I'll tell you about it. Here we go.
Tell us.
The United States played, I think it was El Salvador, and we played them in February. And if you know anything about the United States and the northern part of the United States in February, specifically Minnesota, it is very cold. It is very cold in Minnesota. I couldn't tell you what the temperature is, but like it's very cold there. It's El Salvador. If you know anything about El Salvador, it never gets cold there. And so we played Canada in the first game of the international break, and the return leg was, as I said, I'm fairly sure against El Salvador, but it might have been Panama. One of those countries where it never gets cold. We chose to play them in February in an open-air stadium in Minnesota. Part of the thinking there was absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, one, it makes our travel back from Canada shorter because it's, we're right there on the border. But part of it was definitely like, we're going to freeze these people out. And so it worked, and we won. And basically, like, they didn't even keep their subs on the bench. It was so cold. They left their subs in the locker room. I mean, it was, I want to say 7 degrees Fahrenheit, which Celsius, I have no idea. But, like, it's freezing cold. Like, probably they shouldn't even have been allowed to play the game. Yeah. So the game's over. We win. It was a huge game in terms of our qualifying, which, despite our flying so close to the sun at the moment and having all these great players, we still barely qualified in the last game. If it had gone badly, we could have not qualified. So there's outrage after this game. And not from the people who you'd think. Although the Salvadorians also were upset that it was so cold. They said this is ridiculous, and they were right. But the American fans said, we shouldn't have to do that to beat them. This is ridiculous. We should be better than that. We should play them in a warmer climate and beat them there. And it's like, I couldn't understand the outrage. Other than this was unsafe for everyone involved, which I wasn't terribly happy about. But, like, why should we feel that we had this right to beat them? By the way, if you go to El Salvador and play and it's 110 degrees and 1,000% humidity and they're throwing pennies at you from the sidelines, no one there is saying, like, we shouldn't have to throw these pennies. Like, we have the right to beat them. It's like, no, they're clawing and they're fighting with everything they have. But you have to look at yourself first and say, here's what we have. So if we need to freeze someone to win, and that's what we have, fuck it, I'm on board. But, like, first you have to look at yourself and you have to be able to say, like, I'm not leaving this up to chance. Like, we are where we are. We need this win. We have no right to just beat this team. And I think that's part of the issue with United and Everton too, is this money is involved. There's history involved. Longer ago for Everton, but both clubs have a history of being at a really high level, and they say, no, this is where we should be. And so they skip the part where they have to fight for it and where they have to suffer, the hard things for it. And so I hope that diversion into the world of US soccer was worth it for people. But I think it illustrates a point, is that, you don't have a right to be there. And if you can't get a good look at who you are and humble yourself enough to accept this is where we are right now, it's really hard to create a vision that will move you forward, because you keep articulating visions that are too close to the sun for your wax wings to handle.
And they're too far away from the reality of the situation that you're in. And I think City could be, I think how they're reacting right now is not too dissimilar, where it's we are the richest club in the world technically now. We have the best, most successful coach in the world right now. And here's these upstarts who are coming along and making it difficult for us. And I think they could be in danger of, in the next few years, if they not slipping away as much as the others have, but certainly being challenged by more than just us, because they've gotten used to, they've become fat and lazy. They've gotten used to just winning. And now, like, okay, it's, they are ahead in the league. They may well win the league this year. They may well win the Champions League. But for the amount of investment that they've had, they should have the league wrapped up by now. And Chelsea should be, a point behind them with the amount of money if we take it. But it just shows that it's not about that. The money does not buy you success. And I think that's one of the things that people forget about City, is that, yes, they have absolutely sports washed. Yes, they have spent millions, billions on players, but they put the structures in place in order for them to give them the best chance of being successful. So even before Guardiola arrived, 2-3 seasons before he arrived, they were putting the structures in place with a view to him coming in. So the people were in place, the players that he was going to use were being put in place so they could be bedded in. Like, that's all with a vision and a long-term plan. And I don't like saying this about them, but it's why they're being successful, as well as the finances.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think you don't need the success that Liverpool and City have right now is a success of the vision and long-term planning. And that's what it shows. And I think, like, there's different ways to do that. The money helps, but it's not essential. And Klopp has shown that. And that's not to say Liverpool have spent nothing, but it's to show that if you have the right people and a clear enough vision and you can create a good enough culture, because this, we've gotten away from culture a little bit, but this is where these ruptures come up, and you end up with different groups because you end up with split expectations around what should we be doing and what are our values and what is our goal and how should we be playing, and fans, what should we be expecting from the players, and players, like, what am I expecting from the fans? Like, I mean, you've got different players being booed. You see that, right? Like, our fans are behind our players so much, but you don't have to go back very far to a time where, I'll say it quietly, but our expectations were horribly out of sync with our reality.
Yeah.
And I think people will say, like, hey, it's like, if you're a Liverpool fan, you should always be expecting trophies and demanding trophies. And I think, like, wanting success and wanting a lot out of your team is one thing, but demanding something that is impossible at some point is just a lack of humility. And that lack of humility creates issues. That's not to say that, like, if things aren't going well, you have to lack desire to get back on top. Like, you don't have to give up on your dream of being good, but it's just, you have to be honest about where you are. And there was a time where, when Klopp came in, it was like, okay, if we can get top 4, that's going to be really good. If we can do this, we got here gradually. We can't forget that. And, like, we got here gradually also by being really clear about where we were. And,
I think, though, as well, like, taking your point on about accepting where you are, I think that probably happened in terms of the club hierarchy when they brought in Hodgson. But he was unable to come in with a long-term vision and a plan. So even he was saying, our draws are good. Klopp was never in the case of our draws are good. They are what we got, but they're not good. And, he was able to say, this is not where we wanted to be, but we're working towards something. Whereas Hodgson was just mediocrity.
Yeah, and maybe actually, as you talk about it this way, Hodgson was the best thing to ever happen to Liverpool. Now let me explain. Our fans were all like, we should be on top of the pile. And they were bringing in these managers who maybe it was like, gave some hope that expectation was reality. What they did was they brought in Hodgson, and Hodgson was like, let's just not get relegated, everyone. And so we, as fans, we had to meet him in the middle and be like, no, hold on. Like, we'll fight for top 4. Like, we'll deal with Europa League for a couple of years. And he was like, no, I think just avoiding relegation would be okay. If we get a point a game, we're looking pretty good come May. And so as fans, we were like, no. Okay, hold on. We're not the best. We'll take this middle and we'll build from the middle. And that's what did it. I think now that you talk about it is, we had to see what the future looked like if we stayed on that track. So I think he was the ghost of Premier League future was Roy Hodgson.
I think we've got the name of this podcast, which is Thanks Roy Hodgson.
Thank you, Roy Hodgson. Yeah. All you need sometimes is someone to tell you to have a harsh look in the mirror, although that's not exactly what he did, but it's what he encouraged us to do. And I think the other thing you said there too about Klopp that was really important is like acknowledging what's not good enough. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think he did a really nice job with that. I mean, he set a goal. He said 4 years before we can really compete the way we want, but also like he had things to say to everyone about what wasn't good enough. And like, we talk all the time about the message he was sending when he had the players go over and applaud at West Brom and, the message that was meant to communicate to the players, but also to the fans. Like it's super important. And, he was saying like, hey, not good enough to leave early. Not good enough to do this. We need you if we're going to do this. Take nothing for granted. That's something that Klopp is so good at. And I think it comes because he started at Mainz and because he played at a low level for a long time. just take nothing for granted in terms of what you think you should be able to accomplish. And I mean, as much as like Renick right now, like I don't understand his approach. Like at least he's giving them a harsh look at where they are.
Yeah.
Nowhere. And I like that.
Well, Andrew, this has been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation as we delve into the demise of two of our oldest rivals. And hopefully it continues for a long, long time. So hopefully Everton will get relegated now, and then United will get relegated next season. That'll be fantastic.
Oh, could you even imagine?
I could. It would be great.
Oh
Make
God,
my day-to-day life a lot better as well, because I'll be able to just...
That would be so much fun. I've said before, my best friend is a United fan, and for such a long time, it was just so unbearable. To like when they were good, it was so unbearable. And then even when they weren't very good, but they seemed to like get a result against us every year, or that one draw where Ollie would park the bus, it was so unbearable. Yeah. And to witness the collapse against us just the other day was just thrilling. So yeah,
I was in the gym this morning, and the gym instructor is a big United fan, and every time I'm in, we have conversations mainly about United and how shit they are. But there was another guy who was there, and I haven't met him before, but I turned around to him. I was like, "Are you a football fan?" And he was like, he just put his head down. And I went, "Oh, United," and he was like, "Yeah, I don't want to talk about it." It was great. Because, and do you know what else? This guy was ripped and built. And I was like, yeah, fuck you.
Ripped and built and demoralized. And all in
broken.
One broken.
It was great. It was great. Well, Andrew, thanks very much for your insight into what culture, when culture can go wrong, and thanking Roy Hodgson.
That's right. All the way over to the chilly winters of Minnesota, to the sunny shores of El Salvador, and back to Roy Hodgson. So thank you, Roy.
Thank you, Roy. All right, guys. Until next time, look after yourselves. And if you are if you are not a subscriber, why not get on over and subscribe, because you get tons of fantastic content on a daily basis. And until next time, take care of yourselves.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at anfieldindex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index, and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.